Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting from San Antonio, Texas. I'm Amy Goodman. The Islamic State could be on the verge of capturing the besieged Syrian town of Kobani along the Turkish border. ISIS has taken major parts of Kobani after weeks of heavy attacks. Speaking in Geneva, the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura, urged international intervention to prevent Kobani's fall.
The world has seen with its own eyes the images of what happens when a city in Syria or in Iraq is overtaken by the terrorist group called ISIS or Daesh. Massacres, humanitarian tragedies, rapes, horrific violence. The city of Kobani on the northern border of Syria, close to Turkey, has been under siege now for 3 weeks. They are fighting with normal weapons, whereas the ISIS has got tanks and mortars. The international community needs to defend them. The international community cannot sustain another city falling under ISIS.
Meanwhile, in neighboring Turkey, at least 12 people have died in Kurdish-led protests calling for Turkish intervention to prevent Kobani's fall. Thousands of demonstrators clash with police in the predominant Kurdish areas of the east as well as in the capital, Ankara. Around 200,000 people have fled the Islamic State attack on Kobani, most of them Kurds. The United Nations has issued a new warning over what it calls the grave conditions for internally displaced people inside Iraq. On Tuesday, Kevin Kennedy, the deputy UN humanitarian coordinator, said Iraq's 1.8 million internally displaced face a new crisis as winter looms.
We are confronting a very grave crisis about Iraq, and in particular meeting the needs of the 1.8 million internally displaced persons who have come about in December 2013. Due to the violence and the conflict in Iraq, which continues unabated. The displaced Iraqis can be found throughout all of Iraq, but particularly in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Our fear is, unless we can provide the shelter and also the items to help people live through the winter, what is currently a very difficult and grave humanitarian challenge will transform itself into a deadly life-threatening situation for many of the IDPs.
Canada, meanwhile, has become the latest member of the U.S.-led coalition after its parliament voted to join the airstrikes in Iraq. The first Ebola patient diagnosed in the U.S. remains in critical but stable condition at a Dallas hospital here in Texas. Thomas Eric Duncan is receiving an experimental drug and is on dialysis in a fight for his life. On a visit to Dallas to support Duncan's extended family, the Reverend Jesse Jackson expressed concerns about his treatment.
In the case of Eric Duncan, the concern here is that we see him as a patient and not see him as a criminal. When he was in Liberia with a great reputation, he assisted a woman who was pregnant to get health care. She died. No one knew that she had the Ebola. He came to America to marry without feeling any symptoms of sickness. He went straight home to be with family. Clearly, if he had an infectious disease, to his knowledge, he would not have done that. He got sick and came to the hospital. The symptoms of
Thomas Eric Duncan has no health insurance. He was initially sent home from a Dallas hospital despite telling a nurse he had been to Liberia. He was readmitted by ambulance 4 days later. 4 of Duncan's relatives have been quarantined. Dozens others whom he may have come in contact with are being monitored. An American journalist being treated in Nebraska after contracting Ebola in Liberia is receiving the same experimental drug as Duncan. The journalist, Ashoka Mukpo, is said to be in stable condition. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it's preparing to roll out tougher Ebola screening measures at airports later this week. The new requirements would take effect in the U.S. and overseas. On Tuesday, CDC Director Tom Frieden said the global Ebola response should not stigmatize or demonize people or communities.
I think we have to keep a couple of things in mind. The first is that globally, this is going to be a long, hard fight. And the second is that we can never forget that the enemy here is a virus. The enemy is Ebola, not people, not countries, not communities, a virus. And it's a virus that doesn't spread through the air and that we do know how to control. We do know how to stop it by isolating patients, doing contact tracing, and breaking the chains of transmission.
In Hong Kong, student protesters have agreed to begin talks with government officials Friday after more than a week of pro-democracy demonstrations. Tens of thousands have flooded the streets in opposition to China's plan to select candidates for Hong Kong's 2017 elections. The protests have wound down in recent days, but student leader Lester Shum said they could resume if the talks fail.
Stating here that we sincerely hope that or urge Carrie Lam to face this political problem directly in the political dialogue on Friday. If Ms. Carrie Lam or the other Hong Kong officials still insist that they will not respond or they will not try to solve the political problem, we may consider to end the political dialogue.
The protests mark Hong Kong's biggest political unrest in decades and one of China's biggest political challenges since the Tiananmen Square demonstrations in 1989. Back in the United States, police and officials are reportedly preparing for riots in Missouri should a grand jury choose not to indict police officer Darren Wilson for the killing of the unarmed teenager Michael Brown. The grand jury's decision is expected next month after weeks of deliberations. According to Reuters, Missouri authorities have drawn up contingency plans in case violence breaks out in response to a non-indictment. The meetings have been held 2 or 3 times a week with the involvement of several agencies, including the FBI. Local officials have also sought intelligence from other police departments nationwide on, quote, out-of-state agitators. After attending the meetings, Ferguson Mayor James Knowles told Reuters the concern is, quote, the unrest is going to be far beyond the city of Ferguson. According to one local gun store owner, weapons sales have been up 50% since Brown's killing, mostly among whites. An African-American man and his partner have filed a lawsuit accusing Indiana police of excessive force in an incident caught on video. Jamal Jones was in the passenger seat of a vehicle driven by his partner, Lisa Mahoney, whose 2 children were in the back. The family was on their way to visit Mahoney's dying mother in a hospital when police pulled them over because Mahoney was not wearing her seatbelt. The officers ordered Jones, who was not driving, to exit the vehicle, but he says he refused out of fear the officers would harm him. Police responded by breaking the car's window and tasering Jones in his seat. Mahoney's son captured the incident on video.
I'm not the operator in this vehicle, so if you do that, all right. I'm not the operation in this vehicle.
Are you gonna open the door?
Why do you say somebody's not gonna hurt you? People are getting shot by the police.
Oh,
That was crazy. That is horrible.
Police say Jones refused to follow their orders and that officers feared for their safety after seeing him reach for the back. On Tuesday, Jamal Jones and Lisa Mahoney spoke out after filing their suit.
It felt like my civil rights was just thrown out the window, along with my body. I tried to explain to the officer my first thing that I said to him, my kids in the car, my mom is passing, can we please just make this as quick as possible? Here go our information. Could we go to the hospital? He threw that out the window. It didn't feel right. I felt black again.
At the end, when it was over with, I looked at all the officers and I said, do you know, I do not feel like I have police officers in my presence right now. It felt like I was just, it felt like it was nothing but gangbangers around me.
According to their complaint, 2 of the officers involved were named in 4 previous federal lawsuits involving the use of excessive force against citizens and arresting citizens without probable cause. In New York City, the family of an African-American man who died in an illegal police chokehold has notified the city it plans to seek $75 million in damages. A father of 6, Eric Garner, died after police wrestled him to the ground and pinned him down. He was accused of selling loose cigarettes. His death fueled the national debate about police use of excessive force and the New York City Police Department policy of cracking down on low-level offenses. Garner's family filed the notice of claim ahead of a planned lawsuit over his death. A Georgia grand jury has elected not to bring charges against a police SWAT team for a raid that left a toddler critically wounded. Bunkum Fonosava spent weeks in a burn unit after a SWAT team threw a flashbang grenade into his playpen while he was sleeping. Authorities had raided the home where he was sleeping in the early hours while searching for an alleged drug dealer who was not there at the time. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, Sally Quillian Yates, says she will now review the case for potential federal charges. And a string of marriage equality victories continues with bans struck down in 2 more states. On Tuesday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned LGBT marriage bans in Idaho and Nevada. The decision comes one day after the Supreme Court rejected appeals from 5 states whose marriage equality bans had previously been struck down. After Tuesday, LGBT marriage is now legal in 32 states, up from 19 just last week. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.